An amazing performance.
This is Magnus Carlsen, son of Cedar, world number one across all time formats, and we're diving in here on something special, a once in a lifetime. It's the Superbet Rapid and Blitz tournament played in May 2024, and not only is this game incredible against world number 4 Arjun Eregaisi, but also what happened afterwards is just insane. More to come. Here we see d4 from Arjun, and Magnus responds in kind, fighting for the centre. Both players developing their knights with a Winnie. Now we see bishop f4, the London system. Magnus quickly updates his score sheet. He was playing guess the opening variation. Both players have a giggle, and Magnus copies the move. They've already created a big Jenga tower on the f-file there. Both players still tittering. They do a fist bump, explode it out, and now we see the e-pawns developing, getting the second bishop out. Bishop d3. Arjun breaks the Jenga tower at its base. A few spectators boo. Arbiter calls for hush, and Magnus drops this one back. We see castles. Bishop d6. Magnus whipping that one out, but Arjun says can you nay nay, jumps his horse e4 into the outpost, bishop hit, and so Magnus goes after Arjun's bishop. We see captures on g6, h recaptures, bishop takes here. An interesting transposition has taken place. We've got two knights versus knight and bishop. Arjun slightly better, playing the most explosive move with pawn to c4, and now Magnus, cool as a gentle ocean breeze, picks up his c-pawn and plays pawn to c-ships, one of our favourite moves, and he sets up the lovely party hat pawn formation. Knight c3 now played, knight d7, very natural, and g3. Takes control over f4, the knight no longer hopping, e4 could be on the way, so this one re-enters the game, clamping on e4, and now I'm drawing on the board a number of decent moves for white here. Arjun doesn't choose any of them. He plays the mysterious rook move, or is it so mysterious? What could he be planning here? We see takes on c4, bishop recaptures, castles, and now e4, dominating the centre, taking control of that juicy d5 square, but Magnus wants to push pawns, strike back. Is e5 a threat? Well, not according to Magnus. He goes rook fd8, he wants to be a cookie monster, chip away at that centre in a moment, and if you go e5 here, it is playable but not winning a piece. Queen b4 comes, and you're counter-attacking on this bishop. This is how the line could proceed here, with the bishop being defended. Now you get something like this. White marginally better, but nothing really. So we come back here. Instead of e5, Arjun goes bishop b3. Now e5 from Magnus. Good move. We see d5 is possible here, but takes played instead. How would you recapture that pawn? There's a right way and a wrong way. If you go with the knight, strike yourself with a wooden stick. You're running into this tactical shot, f4, knight retreating, and e5. That's more awkward than Wesley So's home online chess setup. Look at him there, got his blankie, yes, but it's still strange. We come back. The queen took the pawn instead, the right way to go. f4 played, Arjun goes rah, makes a low growling noise, and now this is instructive. You can play queen c5 check, but it wasn't selected. We see queen e7 played instead. Why? Well, we're gonna see, because after queen f3, Magnus plonks his pony on c5, and this is why he didn't want the queen on that square. Bishop under fire, also the e-pawn, so Arjun pushes forward. We see knight takes on b3. What happens if you take here? Critical variation. Hit the queen. Well, then there's this check. All important. Then you can do something like this, and black survives. Doesn't go down a minor piece. So instead, we see a takes on b3, double b pawns, ugly, knight e8 from Magnus, currently out the game, but headed for some light square control. Now this rook challenges the open file. There's only one on the board, so it becomes of critical importance. Rook takes played. Rook recaptures. Magnus challenges, very natural. King f1 now played, and the knight spins round, re-entering the fight. Knight e4, that square's juicy, Arjun licking his lips, and after Magnus takes with check, we see queen recaptures, and now avert your eyes if you're easily offended, because Magnus Carlsen picks up the f-pawn and plays it to f6 here. The king indecently exposed, down the diagonal, lifted the kill, but it's a good move. Magnus has got to try and break up that connect 4 at the head of the chain. So Arjun goes queen d6, entering the outpost. Now king f7, I got you honey, says the king to the queen. This queen drops back, now looking to land an octopus on d6, so Magnus takes action. Hits the queen, covers d6. White would love to have an a-pawn right now, but not possible. We see queen c4 check, king f8 played, knight c5 now, looking at the juicy e6 square, and so Magnus takes here. We see pawn recaptures, and it sets a cunning trap. How many of us are picking up that pawn? If you do, then you get hit with this one. Arjun would go to Forktown, population Magnus, that is terminal. So instead, we see this move of queen f7 check. Magnus doesn't declare it, he just shoots it with his finger, kind of John Wayne style-y. Lots of the top players do that. We see king e2 played, pawn b6, kicks the knight, and it should just retreat to d3 here. But Arjun gets a bit clever, pushes the pawn to e6, but after simply queen f5, knight d3, king e7 played, and the Gregorian chanting begins for that pawn. It's moribund. Arjun desperately tries knight to f4. He should have gone to b4 to try and go after this one, but after this, it runs into simply pawn g5, given a brilliancy or a great move because it was the only move to keep significant advantage and what to do. The knight stumbling away. First we see a check. Stockfish hates everything Arjun does now. Move after move. Magnus blocks. Great move. Knight d3 now played, and Magnus eats the pawn with check. He's a pawn to the good. We see king d2, c5, and the position's getting so bad the engine wants to sack a piece for some pawns here. Not done. Queen a4 selected. This one under fire. Magnus defends, sets up one of our favourite pawn formations here on Epic Cheese. That one you'll know all about if you're a regular viewer, and if you're not, do consider subscribing. Evidence shows you're far more likely to become a grandmaster if you subscribe to the channel. Now we see knight e1, any one for a knight maneuver, and queen d5 check played. King c1, knight e4, an epic attacking force. The queen is a rook and a bishop combined. The knight then works nicely with the two. They complement each other, sage and onion, and after knight f3, trying to cover the square, the queen's in Siberia, Magnus simply plows on. Gary the debt collector banging on the door, get out the way, knight h4 played, and now this is strange. It's like looking at Fabi dressed up on a weekend to do his deep analysis, or watching Anish Giri go for a win, or seeing a chess grandmaster fall out his chair, or watching Kasparov's face when he offers a draw. I'll leave it there. Some things you just don't expect to happen. Magnus doesn't play queen d2 check, which leads to mate in 13 apparently, driving the king this way and then carrying on the checking and bringing in the knight. He instead goes pawn g5. Arjun checks, king f6, and in scurries the queen. An absolute sortie on the black king here. Magnus has to take defensive maneuvers, so he goes queen to e6. Loves the ladies off the board, but he was completely winning. This is crazy, and it's suddenly game on. Because after king c2, Magnus should now go knight f6, followed by b5, but he plays knight d6. Question this move, we must, because now king d3 and king f6, the force is weak with this one at this moment. They're scrambling on seconds. Magnus has managed to go from mate in 13 to a level game. We get knight f8, king e7, the knight back, a repeat of moves here, a dance. Is Magnus teasing us? Are they going to make a draw? No, they're not. He goes king e6, I was about to say d5, but now we get get a check. King d5 is the next move, and knight d7. Goes after b6 and looks for knight f6 check. So Magnus goes c4 check, explosive, liquidating a pawn. This knight hops in, covers b6, but what about knight f6 check? It's a great move. It keeps things level, but not played. We see king c3 instead, saving this pawn. Very understandable though, because then black's got these two dangerous ones. And now here Magnus also plays a terrible move because king c6 best, but he blitzes this one out on seconds, gives this pawn with check. King e4, knight c4 takes these horses off the board. They leave with a death nay, and now fasten your seatbelts because we've got a race on our hands. Here we go. Magnus marches in. A few of the onlookers stand up in their chairs, start beating their newspapers against tables and chairs. It's like a horse race here. All back in their horses. We've got B versus G. They're banging on the desk. Go on, laddie. But guess what? It's Arjun who makes it first, past the post, to be Prime Minister. Queen on the board here, but not so fast. Magnus makes one of his own. We've got a challenger with backup to come. Now we see a check. This king marching to g2, pawn under fire, so Magnus starts checking. He gives a whole series of checks here just to gain time on the clock. Finally, in a moment, he marches the g-pawn, but Arjun, he gets his own queen active. We see more checks. Few more, queen e3, g3. This pawn is so close to becoming a baby girl, and after king a8, Magnus checking a few more times to pick up time on the clock. We now see a blunder from Arjun because it's apparently still level. White can do some ninja checks, but not after king a5. Apparently the king belonged on the 7th rank. Carsten Muller not impressed, loves himself an endgame, and after king h2, red carpet rolled out, queen e4 played. Well, now it's Magnus's turn to give an imprecise check, but we can't criticise. They're on seconds here. Now we get king a6. This queen comes to the g-file, more checks, and Magnus gets given an absolute runaround all the way back to g6, but hang on. Now Arjun has to play either queen e4 or queen g2. He checks from here, and this is the big problem. Because the king is on a6, after this sidestep, you cannot check from this square here, where you'd like to, or this square here, because black will always intercept the queen with a counter check. Ladies leave the board, pawn runs. So that's why Arjun comes here. g2 on the board, another check, the king steps back, and here we see resignation from Arjun because there's no more checks that don't allow black to trade off the queens, have a one end game. Magnus takes home the game, and this is what the commentators were so going nuts about. He scored 10 in a row. That's adoption territory. Super grandmasters being treated like adopted kids. Absolutely insane. Magnus won the tournament, and for another incredible game from this very event, have a look at the video on screen. Thanks very much for watching, and I hope to see you soon.